What if the most famous maritime graveyard wasn't an accident of nature, but a feature, meticulously designed, expertly disguised, and cunningly leveraged by men in iron-pressed suits with government clearances? You're drifting now in a creaky fishing trawler, the kind with peeling paint and rust-framed windows, somewhere between Miami and San Juan. The sea hums low beneath you, glassy and endless. Your compass needle jitters, not enough to alarm you, but enough to itch the edges of your nerves. Then the radio fizzles, static, no signal. It's as if you've slipped between the pages of reality, right into a fold engineered to forget you. That's the Bermuda Triangle, right? A place of mystery, a place of vanishing ships and aircraft, whispered about in coffee shops and conspiracy forums alike. But tonight, let's not simply fear it. Let's ask, what if the disappearances weren't chaotic, but curated? So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Comment where you're listening from and what time it is. I always love reading those. Now, dim the lights for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You begin in 1945 with Flight 19. 5 Navy Avenger bombers vanished during a routine training exercise. The official report says pilot disorientation, but even that reads like a shrug. One pilot's last recorded words, "Everything looks strange, even the ocean," echo like something lifted from a dream or a lie. Here's what's rarely mentioned. At that time, the U.S. Navy had recently begun deep-sea acoustic mapping tests, probing the very ocean floor in this region. The timing? Suspicious. The technology? Experimental. And most of all, the location? Eerily precise. The Bermuda Triangle, as a concept, wasn't popularized until the 1950s. Before that, it was just another patch of ocean. But once the pattern of vanishing vessels became public narrative, it also became the perfect curtain. A magic trick. Misdirection for the masses. What's more intriguing is that the majority of these incidents occurred along an overlapping pattern that mirrors Cold War-era naval corridors. Routes favored not by coincidence, but by strategic necessity. These were lanes where submarines routinely traveled, sonar tests were conducted, and underwater beacons quietly blinked Morse code through black waters. By 1960, the U.S. government had authorized dozens of black-budget oceanographic studies, often fronted by benign-sounding academic institutions. One such operation, Project Neptunian Echo, was billed as a climate study, but required teams to deploy strange cylindrical devices at various points across the triangle. These weren't weather monitors. According to a declassified 1981 memo, they emitted low-frequency pulses that could be used to detect foreign submarines, or perhaps confuse navigational equipment. And here's where the reality check swims up to kiss you on the ankle. If you were caught in one of these zones during a pulse phase, your instruments would go haywire, your comms would drop, and, yes, you might disappear off radar without ever meaning to. Some skeptics argue it's just coincidence, that planes crash and boats sink. But even seasoned analysts admit the triangle's incident ratio doesn't follow typical maritime or aviation trends. One naval historian, Dr. Ernest Tillman, pointed out in 1977 that the triangle's recorded anomalies seemed to spike during sonar calibration periods. A dry academic way of saying someone was testing something, and they didn't care if the fish or the fishermen suffered. Of course, not everyone agrees. Scientists still argue whether these patterns point to true human interference or just psychological pattern seeking. Yet the overlap remains. Just like that static hum in your ears, never loud, but always there. And if you think that's unsettling, just wait until you learn who requested those specific naval routes in the first place. What if the maps you trust don't tell the truth? Not because of laziness or ignorance, but by design. You glide now through a midnight stretch of ocean, where the waves roll slow and lazy, as if drunk on some forgotten memory. The air is heavy with salt and static. Somewhere beneath your feet, far below the wooden ribs of your imagined ship, there's a silence so deep it buzzes. You're above the seafloor of the Bermuda Triangle. But it isn't just sand and coral, it's hiding things. Let's unfurl a few charts. Naval ones, not tourist brochures. In the 1960s, the U.S. Navy conducted a series of classified deep-sea mapping missions under the banner of Operation Hydrostat. The goal? Officially, it was to improve nautical navigation accuracy. Unofficially, the operation laid out a gridded topography of seafloor anomalies, massive trenches that didn't appear on any civilian maps, ridges with magnetic signatures inconsistent with natural geology, and cavern-like voids that swallowed sonar pings whole. What's odd isn't just what they found, but what they didn't want us to see. Take Ridge 17C, a jagged undersea formation near the western edge of the triangle. Classified data from 1964, leaked in a now-buried 1993 exposé by Navy contractor Wallace Greer, suggested the ridge produced unexplained acoustic reflections, as though hollow or metallic. Greer's notes included a sketch of a sonar printout that looked eerily like the echo of a vast man-made object buried beneath the sediment. When Greer attempted to publish his findings, his security clearance was revoked, and he was reassigned to a weather station in Alaska. Coincidence? Maybe. But odd how many Triangle researchers seem to end up in cold, remote places. And then, there's the curious case of Grid Sector 9F civilian satellite images of the area consistently show cloud cover or image corruption, as if that one patch of sea just refuses to be photographed. You can find grainy photos online, the kind where sea turns pixelated and white, like someone spilled digital bleach across the image. Enthusiasts call it the blur. Officials don't call it anything at all. And remember those cylindrical devices from Section 1? Turns out many were dropped right along the edges of Grid Sector 9F. Which begs the question, were these beacons, detectors, or anchors for something buried? Scientists still argue whether these features are natural phenomena or remnants of Cold War interference. But a quietly released 1972 report titled Seafloor Structural Irregularities in the North Atlantic Corridor, written by oceanographer Dr. Rosita Cheng, documented unusually regular formations and magnetic anomalies inconsistent with tectonic activity. The paper was quietly withdrawn 2 weeks after release. Dr. Chung herself later declined all interviews, issuing only one statement through a legal representative. I do not wish to revisit matters that jeopardize national security. It's not just the Americans who were curious. The Soviets, too, had maps, ones with triangle regions shaded in ink dark red and marked with the word unverified. Their naval vessels circled the region often, but rarely entered it. When they did, some were never heard from again. In 1978, a Soviet submarine, known only by its numeric code, K1299, entered the triangle as part of a monitoring exercise. It vanished without a trace. No wreckage, no distress call. Just a ghost on sonar, then silence. Mainstream historians chalk these stories up to Cold War paranoia. But that paranoia often had a strange knack for circling truths no one wanted to say out loud. And here's your quirky tidbit. In 1985, an amateur treasure diver named Clark Edmondson claimed to find what he called a bronze hatch, embedded in coral 180 feet below the surface near Nassau. He described it as perfectly circular, cold to the touch despite warm waters, and etched with markings resembling Morse code. He photographed it, swam up, and tried to get a second dive the next day. But a private security team had cordoned off the area by sunrise, and Edmondson's footage? Mysteriously damaged. This is the kind of detail skeptics like to snicker at. But do you remember Ridge 17C? That sonar shadow that might have been metal. Perhaps Edmondson's hatch wasn't part of a shipwreck, but part of something built, something sealed, and something never meant to be opened. So when you look at a map of the Bermuda Triangle, with its sharp corners and easy labels, remember, the triangle isn't just a myth, it's a mask. And sometimes the ocean keeps secrets not because it's mysterious, but because someone told it to. You hear it before you feel it. A hum, faint and steady, like a tuning fork trapped underwater. It thrums through your chest, not unpleasant. Almost musical, but unnatural. That's what they say about the phantom frequencies. You might mistake it for tinnitus, or a dream. But according to certain documents with no agency name and no author, this signal was deliberate. Broadcast, targeted. Enter, Project Whisper. No plaque commemorates it. No official record admits it. Yet fragments of its legacy drift through retired naval personnel stories, hastily scrubbed patents, and faded microfilm stored in university basements. The premise was deceptively simple. Send ultra-low frequency, ULF, signals across the ocean floor, bounce them off anomalies, and monitor the return data for shifts. What's less simple is what those frequencies did to anything caught in the path. ULF waves are powerful. In theory, they can travel thousands of kilometers without weakening. In practice, they can also mess with navigation systems, distort magnetometers, and, in the words of a now-deceased engineer named Carter Ellison, make metal forget where it is. Ellison worked for the Naval Research Laboratory in the late 1950s. In a recorded interview from 1982, leaked briefly before being pulled, he described a test off the coast of Puerto Rico. A fleet of 3 signal buoys were activated, each calibrated to emit distinct ULF tones. The result? An entire convoy of Navy aircraft, 10 planes in total, reported erratic compass readings, blackouts, and temporary loss of altitude. One pilot, Lieutenant Brooks Mather, claimed the sky rippled above him like a curtain of melted glass. The mission was aborted. The official cause? Solar flare interference. But there was no solar activity that week, and Ellison was quietly transferred soon after. Stranger still, a cruise ship passing nearby reported all their watches slowed down by exactly 11 minutes. The captain logged the event but later insisted it must have been mass hysteria. Curious how hysteria tends to occur precisely where secret experiments do. One theory suggests that Project Whisper was not just about detection. It was about cloaking. By flooding an area with certain frequencies, you could, in theory, blind radar and sonar. In other words, you could hide submarines in plain sight, or confuse anyone looking too closely. The phantom frequencies continued well into the 1970s, allegedly piggybacking off marine weather buoys. A clever disguise. While the public thought they were transmitting wave data, in reality, some were emitting deep pulses at intervals too low for human hearing, but not too low to disrupt electronics or trigger inexplicable reactions in sea life. In 1973, for instance, an entire pod of whales was found beached near Andros Island, eyes hemorrhaged and inner ears shattered. The local paper blamed underwater mining, but no mining was ever reported. Scientists still argue whether these anomalies can be attributed to seismic activity, electromagnetic storms, or good old-fashioned hoaxes. Yet no one has offered a solid explanation for the disappearing buoys. Yes, disappearing. Between 1975 and 1979, 5 government-anchored monitoring buoys vanished without a trace. No storm, no debris, just gone. And this brings us to the fringe tidbit of the night. In 1981, an amateur ham radio operator in Key Largo intercepted a bizarre series of tones on a dead marine frequency. When played back at high speed, they resembled Morse code. Translated loosely, the message was a single repeated phrase: "Do not descend." The recording exists, though skeptics dismiss it as a prank. Still, It's odd how often pranks sound like warnings after something goes wrong. Project Whisper was quietly mothballed in the mid-80s, replaced by something called Aquamarine Shroud, which no one knows anything about. Or rather, no one's willing to say. But rumors persist of undersea towers, disguised as coral reefs, emitting pulses to this day. And here's a sleepy reality check. If you've ever felt a strange dizziness while flying over the Caribbean, if your phone ever lost signal in a perfectly clear patch of sea, if your compass once spun for no reason, perhaps you weren't just tired. Perhaps you brushed against the whisper. You book a sunset cruise from Fort Lauderdale. The boat's name is Starward, painted in cheerful blues, with a crew that looks like they've never done a secret thing in their lives. There's a buffet of shrimp cocktail, complimentary wine, and a guitarist singing Jimmy Buffett. You lean over the railing, watching dolphins leap in the distance. Everything seems normal. Too normal. But beneath the deck, behind a false wall in the storage cabin, there's a rigged sonar array wired to a silent transponder. It's not connected to your fish finder or the navigation panel. It runs on a battery pack separate from the main generator. This is not a pleasure cruise. This is surveillance in a Hawaiian shirt. Reports of such ships, civilian vessels operating as covert intel platforms, date back to at least 1969, when the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, DARPA, initiated a covert directive called Poseidon's Mirage. Its stated goal was to expand passive maritime intelligence collection capabilities without raising foreign suspicion. Translation? Disguise your spies as tourists. The Triangle became a favorite zone for this strategy. Why? Because if anything strange happened, vanished signals, lost time, missing equipment, the public already had a story to explain it. The myth of the Triangle. Brilliant, isn't it? Let's revisit a name from Section 2, Wallace Greer, the contractor who exposed Ridge 17C. Before his reassignment to Alaska, Greer claimed to have worked on several pleasure vessels, equipped with what he called ocean ears, devices meant to pick up ultra-low resonance waves, the same kind generated in Project Whisper. He described a setup involving hidden antennas within the flagpole, pressure sensors in the bilge, and signal boosters hidden inside lifeboats. These weren't boats. They were floating lie detectors. But here's where it gets even sleepier. Many of the captains weren't government agents. They were freelancers, hired through dummy corporations, paid in cash. Some of them didn't even know what they were transporting. Take the case of Captain Maurice Delano, whose 1977 ship logs mysteriously omitted 2 full days. When pressed by journalists, he responded, "I was asleep the whole time. I think we just floated." That brings us to one of the most chilling footnotes in the Triangle's espionage history. In 1983, a ship registered as Amadora's Kiss was discovered adrift near Grand Turk. The crew was missing, but the vessel was intact. Inside the cabin, investigators found documents detailing hydroacoustic monitoring protocols, a radio tuned to a dead frequency, and, most curious of all, 10 cassette tapes marked with dates and coordinates. The tapes, when played, contained only ocean noise, except one. Tape 7 had a low, modulated voice whispering numbers. Not Morse, not a language, just numbers. Rapid, looping, and interrupted every 90 seconds by the sound of something metallic scraping. None of the officials ever claimed the tapes publicly. The ship was towed, impounded, and quietly dismantled. Scientists still argue whether these ghost ship stories reflect factual anomalies or just the world's greatest PR campaign for a patch of sea. Yet, that doesn't explain the sheer consistency. The same pattern: fake boats, real tech, and plausible deniability. And here's tonight's fringe detail. In 1991, a tourist snapped a photo of what he thought was a whale surfacing near the Bahamas. When the film was developed, the whale appeared to have a steel-plated hull, dual antennae, and no dorsal fin. The photo was confiscated at the airport during what was described as a random customs inspection. The tourist never got his film back. You ever wonder why the stories of the Triangle always focus on the disappearances, but never on who might have been watching? So next time you're on a boat tour and the crew insists you avoid certain areas for safety, you might want to ask, safety for who? A retired Navy diver once said, "The ocean doesn't forget. It just doesn't explain." His name was Julian Hawthorne, not related to the author, though he claimed distant lineage, as if literary blood could shield him from what he found off Andros Island in 1995. Julian wasn't the kind of man to chase ghosts. He was a technician, rational. Formerly stationed with the Navy's Deep-Sea Salvage Division, he spent most of his life underwater, fixing what others couldn't even reach. After retirement, he took up contract diving, mostly pipeline inspections and shipwreck surveys. Until one job, off the books, took him to a point exactly where Project Whisper's frequencies had once been the strongest. He was hired by a private research institute that didn't appear on any registry. They gave him coordinates, a briefing, and a warning. Record everything, but do not disturb the seabed. That's a strange thing to say to a diver. And stranger still when, 40 meters down, he found a smooth metal structure emerging from coral, like the curved edge of a buried dome. It vibrated under his hand. Not from the current, but like it was humming inside. Julian surfaced, uploaded the footage, and then broke protocol. He went back the next day, alone. No escort, no brief. He wanted another look. He never came back up. The support team claimed his air valve failed, but the emergency transponder on his gear was never activated. A week later, a neighbor received a postcard from Julian, dated after his death. It was blank, save for a triangle drawn in black ink. Stories like Julian's have a strange echo. They're whispered, rarely documented, and never confirmed. Yet the Bermuda Triangle is full of them. Lone professionals who poke too far and vanish not in fire or storm, but silence. The kind of silence that looks like an accident on paper. And what's more suspicious than silence? Let's rewind to 1970, when the U.S. Office of Naval Intelligence funded a deep scanning expedition in the Triangle using a prototype vessel called the Archangel. It was equipped with the most sensitive sonar of its time. Top secret, vibration mapping tech, capable of imaging anomalies under the ocean floor. The vessel transmitted continuous data for 6 days, then stopped abruptly. When it resurfaced, the logs for the final 24 hours were missing. The crew was shaken, visibly exhausted, but offered only this: "We recorded something, breathing." Now, you don't record breathing with sonar, unless the thing you're recording is enormous and somehow moving. That incident was buried, filed under instrument error. But one of the sonar engineers, Peter Lang, went public in 1987 with what he called the heartbeat map, a sonar printout that showed rhythmic pulses echoing through the sediment, like a sleeping machine. He passed away before releasing the original document. And there's your fringe detail tonight. In 2006, a documentary crew filming near that same site captured a strange low thrum on their hydrophones. Not an engine, not a whale. When slowed down and analyzed, it matched the frequency range of human breathing, just vastly deeper, slower. The footage was never aired. Network executives cited copyright conflicts. The audio was leaked online briefly, then vanished. Scientists still argue whether underwater vibrations like these are natural seismic patterns or indicators of artificial constructs. But if something was buried and breathing and humming, wouldn't you want to study it? Or perhaps cover it up? Julian Hawthorne's name is etched on a small plaque at the Naval Museum in Pensacola. It reads, "A diver of uncommon skill." That's all. No mention of the dome. No mention of the missing footage. And certainly, no mention of the postcard. But the triangle remains, drawn in ink, not on paper, but on minds that remember. The deeper you drift, the quieter it gets. Not just sound, but thought, too. The ocean has a way of holding your mind in suspension, as if it's waiting, as if it knows you're listening. Here's the question that's been softly following you through each section. What if the Bermuda Triangle was never meant to scare us, but to distract us? When the stories started swirling in the public's eye, missing planes, ghost ships, inexplicable vanishings, it made for the perfect storm of folklore. Television specials, paperback thrillers, even maps with bright red overlays. And while the world looked wide-eyed into the fog, the CIA was laying cables, testing frequencies, and maneuvering submarines through a corridor everyone else was told to avoid. Classic misdirection. You remember Project Whisper, those ultra-low frequency pulses skimming the seabed? According to an unconfirmed 1992 briefing, those tests were merely a fragment of something larger. Operation Deep Reef, a classified initiative focused not on communications, but on distortion. The idea was to create zones of unreliability, areas where satellite signals degraded, compasses spun, and timekeeping faltered. Places where truth itself became fuzzy. And what better testing ground than a space already believed to be cursed? The operation ran parallel to Soviet tests in the Baltic, but while theirs remained clumsy, U.S. advances in electromagnetic manipulation reportedly resulted in temporary radar invisibility by the mid-'80s. If true, this would mean the Triangle wasn't hiding ships. It was erasing them, from record and from sight. Enter a key player. Diana Cortez, a CIA systems analyst turned whistleblower in 1999. In a suppressed testimony, she described how surveillance satellites were routinely instructed to bypass certain swaths of ocean, not due to weather, but due to active distortion protocols. Her most damning claim? That in 1989, a South American flight lost for over 15 minutes on radar wasn't missing. It was simply inside the blind spot. She was found unresponsive in her apartment a week after her hearing. Cause of death: natural causes. At age 42, scientists still argue whether electromagnetic blind spots even exist at scale. But field technicians, people who work with instruments, not theories, often tell stories of losing calibration, data corruption, and full system failures when passing through hot zones. Many of these lie within or near the Bermuda Triangle. And here's the strangest fragment tonight. A former NASA telemetry analyst claimed in 2004 that one of the agency's oceanic satellites occasionally returned images with ghost reflections, shadows of ships that weren't supposed to be there. When cross-referenced, those reflections aligned with locations of missing vessels recorded decades earlier. His name was never released. His documents? Sealed under the Freedom of Information Act. It's a lot, isn't it? But sometimes, the weight of a lie is measured not in the number of times it's told, but in how many layers it hides. And perhaps the Triangle, with its sharp edges and perfect branding, was never about a geographic mystery, but a narrative one. So the next time someone scoffs and says the Bermuda Triangle isn't real, you might nod and agree. Not because it's fake, but because it was never about what happened there. It was about what they needed you to believe was happening, so they could do something else entirely. Something still pulsing beneath the waves. Now, let your breath slow. The ocean you imagined, dark, humming, endless, begins to soften. The waves grow gentler. The compass stills. The static that once buzzed faintly in your mind now dissolves into a hush, like a lullaby sung by the sea itself. You're no longer aboard a secret vessel, peering into shadows. You're floating, drifting just above the surface of sleep, where time bends softly and thought becomes mist. Let the questions fade, like lights dimming on a distant horizon. Let go of the signal, the hum, the whisper. Tonight, you don't need to prove anything. You don't need to understand the maps or chase the frequencies, or read the vanishing ink of old naval reports. You've wandered far through sound and theory, across stories meant to disappear as gently as you do now. The current cradles you. It doesn't ask where you've been. The triangle fades behind you, not erased, just quieter. And in its place, still water, soft air, and the warmth of knowing that whatever truths may lie hidden, you've traveled close enough to feel them breathe. Close your eyes now. You've earned the stillness. You're not lost. You're simply resting.